Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our series on the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Tonight, my hope, my intention is, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've been going through individual teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And many of them are known, many of them are famous, others are less known, less famous. Tonight, I'm hoping to finish this part of the series. And next week, we're going to start a very specific teaching for the Baal Shem Tov, and prayer. That we'll get to next week, and it will probably take us a few weeks to go through it, but the Baal Shem Tov, one of the greatest innovations of the Chassidic movement was the emphasis that the Baal Shem Tov put on prayer, individual prayer, communal prayer, prayer with joy, prayer with intent. And there is a text that I have been preparing that records his teachings on prayer. It's called Amud Tefillah, the pillar of prayer. That we'll get to next week. So today we're going to do as we've been doing. Many of these Torahs are relatively short. As I've said before, they're in no particular order. They're just the way that I have written down my notes. And as I said, some of these are known or even well known to many people, others less so. So we're going to start with the crossing of the Red Sea. After God makes a miracle, splits the sea, the Egyptians are drowned, and then we sing a song, the Song of the Sea. And then the Torah says we went 3 days without water, and we came to a place called Mara, which means bitter. And it said they came to this place of Mara, and there was water, but they couldn't drink it because it was bitter. And that's the whole story of God showing Moshe a tree. He says, throw the tree in the water, and it sweetens the water. The teaching from the Baal Shem Tov is on the words that the waters were bitter. Marim hem. They were bitter. All of the translations, rightfully so, say that the word they is referring to the water. The waters were bitter. The Baal Shem Tov, and it's actually a legitimate, simple reading of the text. He said, perhaps the waters were bitter, but why were they bitter? Because they were bitter. The people were bitter. Why were they bitter? They had just come from another miracle. And here they were. They went 3 days without water. Now, anyone who's gone 3 days without water, it's a crisis situation. But more than that, we're told that they went 3 days without learning Torah because they were so wrapped up in the booty that they had captured from the drowning Egyptians that their mind was very much on the physical, material. And therefore, they were not involved with a spiritual headspace whatsoever. So that's what the Baal Shem Tov says. The reason that the waters were bitter is because they were bitter. And this is connected to another very, very well-known teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that was adopted by many, many different Chassidic rabbis. And that is, you are where your thoughts are. This is what the Baal Shem Tov said. You are where your thoughts are. If you are bitter, then everything around you will be experienced as being bitter. If you are joyous, everything around you will be a source of joy. It's a very simple teaching, and it became part and parcel of the Chassidic teaching of all the Rebbe's. But the idea is you are where your thoughts are. In modern psychology, of course, there's a great emphasis on having a positive outlook on life. And having a positive outlook on life is one of the best ways of healing emotionally, psychologically, from trauma, from everything, by keeping a positive attitude. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov said. You are where your thoughts are. So it could be, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, I'm looking at, right now at least, there are 17 participants, but some of you may be very, very, very far away right now, because you are where your thoughts are. And so you could be listening to me, but your head is somewhere else. Your thoughts are somewhere else. So that's where you are. You might be seemingly part of the class, but in actuality, you are somewhere else. And of course, this happens to all of us a good part of the time. In fact, in dream research, they found that most people daydream up to 3 hours a day. Now, if you're like supposed to be driving to work, at your job for 8 hours, driving home, and then, eating, taking care of business, whatever a person does. So what we're told is 3 of those hours were actually really somewhere else. And I don't know about you, it's a very scary experience, but if you've ever been driving and all of a sudden you snap to, and you realize that for the last 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, you weren't there. You were like, your mind just went somewhere else. And then all of a sudden you snap up and you're driving a car on a busy street. So that's very scary. But that's what the Baal Shem was saying. You are where your thoughts are. So if your thoughts are in someplace else, in a certain way, that's where you are. Your physical body could be in one place, but the you, your soul, your mind is someplace else. So that is connected to this idea that the Baal Shem said, the waters were bitter because the people were bitter. That the power of thought, this is a whole other area that the Baal Shem talked about, the power of thought. Next week, we'll get into it more, the power of prayer. But the power of thought is very, very powerful. And we know even from modern physics, the idea of the effect of the observer on reality, not just observing reality, but actually forming and influencing reality just by being the observer. How much more so if the observer is focusing their thought in a certain way. If the observer is focusing their thought, then I'll use an example. I'm sure everyone's had this also. You're sitting somewhere and you have this feeling someone is staring at you. You just have this feeling and you turn around and sure enough, someone is like looking right at you. So these are all just examples that we all go through, but are connected to some of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Another teaching, this is also somewhat connected. It's a very, very cardinal teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and that is what bothers you about others is a reflection of some flaw in yourself. This is super psychological, super contemporary. This idea of a transference, of transferring a certain lacking that we have onto someone else, but experiencing it as if it's someone else's problem. And the story that I remember that illustrates this is that the Baal Shem Tov was once walking home from shul Friday night, and on the street he sees two Jews arguing, but really sharply, saying all like really, really terrible things to each other. And the Baal Shem Tov went home, and he was somewhat depressed. And when asked, he explained what had happened, and he said, I don't know what I did to deserve to have seen that. Because the way he related to it is, it must be something in me that I was seeing, or I wouldn't see it. That there was something in their argument that reflected a flaw in myself. But the Baal Shem Tov, this was not just an individual story. The Baal Shem looked at life this way. And there's a famous story, I believe it was of the Mittler Rebbe. And as all the Rebbes, he saw people individually and spent hours and hours and hours every week counseling people, listening to people, helping people. And one time, someone came and they left, and the rabbi, he went into his study, and the shamash noticed that other people were waiting, but the Rebbe had sequestered himself in his study, and he was there virtually the entire night. And when he finally came out, the shamash asked him, Rebbe, what happened? And he said, without revealing, he said, but one of the people that he had seen had such a sinister problem in his life, such a negative occurrence in his life. At first, I couldn't find any place to relate to him, because I never experienced that in myself. But I knew that if I was listening to this person, there must be some place in myself that is harboring even like a shadow of this negative event. And therefore, I had to spend hours until I could find in myself the place of this, we'll call it a shadow, because we don't suspect the Rebbe himself was involved in whatever he heard. But he felt that if he's hearing this, and if he's going to relate to the person and help the person, he has to find the place in himself that can understand that. And at first he couldn't. And he said, I cried many, many tears until I could find that place, and therefore I could fix it in myself, and then hopefully fix it in others. So that just tells you to what degree the Rebbe's took this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov seriously. But obviously this is a teaching for all of us, because we all see faults in others. The famous, the teaching is about you're looking for chametz before Pesach. Well, everyone has such an easy time finding chametz in other people's houses. But what about finding the chametz in your own house? Anyways, this is not an easy teaching to truly integrate, but it's an important teaching that we shouldn't be so quick on the draw to find fault in others before we really give a close look to ourselves. Why are we so bothered by this person or their personality or what they're doing, that we need to look within to see what we can fix in ourselves. Doesn't mean maybe this person has this fault. It's not like saying that no one has any faults. It's all our fault. No, that's not what we're saying. But if something is bothering us about someone else, there's probably a reason, because deep down inside, we might have the same fault. Anyways, this is something you can work on for your whole life, to try to truly understand and to apply. But here, I just want to say, we're talking about people who took spiritual growth very seriously, who looked at what's called tikkun midot, of fixing one's characteristics very, very seriously. And they based their whole life that what else am I doing in this world other than to rectify the taken olam b'malkut Shaddai, to fix the world in the kingdom of God. But that starts obviously at home. That starts at home. Okay, now we're going to switch gears a little bit. This is the next one is a very fundamental teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. And that is, if you hold on to a part of a whole, you hold on to the whole. And the Slonomer Rebbe, some of you have probably heard this from me, because it's such a fundamental teaching. But the Slonomer Rebbe gives a metaphor. And his metaphor is that someone is on a ship sailing at sea and falls overboard. And the ship continues to go. The person is screaming in the water, and they throw him a line. He grabs onto the line, and now the ship is pulling him. And the Slonomer Rebbe says, as long as he's holding on to a part, meaning he's holding on to the rope, he's holding on to the whole ship. This becomes a metaphor, and the one that I love to use the most relates to Shabbat. That Shabbat in the Talmud is called 1/60th of the world to come. 1/60th of the world to come. One might say, that's it? What am I going to do with 1/60th of the world to come? It's like, what is that experience? Doesn't sound like very much. And in fact, we know in halacha, if you have a forbidden substance that falls in, well, it's not a forbidden, but something that will make a substance forbidden, a drop of milk falls into a cholent. well, do you have to throw out the whole cholent? So the law is, if it's less than 1 in 60, it becomes absorbed in. It becomes nullified in the bigger whole. So if you look at Shabbat being 1/60th of the world to come, so if you hold on to that part of Shabbat that is 1/60th of the world to come, it's as if you're holding on to the whole of the world to come. That's a beautiful teaching. And I remember one time I gave over this teaching. I remember it was at Hebrew U, a whole group of students. And I mentioned that every Shabbat, I try for at least a minute, sometimes even a few seconds, to experience what it means to be holding on to the whole world to come. And I said, that's what I call my moment in Shabbat. And I'll say in many cases, it will happen early in the morning when I get up and there's no traffic on the road and the birds are chirping and the sun is out and it's quiet and it's in the garden and it's heavenly. Many times that's my moment. And lately, some of you have been to my yard, but we have lights on a lot of the trees. And it's really stunning. And so when I walk up to my house after davening Kabbalah Shabbat, I always stop and just try to imagine. It's not even imagine, it's actually experiencing the Garden of Eden, the world to come. Anyways, I gave over this whole idea to this group of students. And then, I don't remember, weeks later, a month later, I had a whole house full of students from Hebrew U. And at the table, one of the women turned to me and said, have you had your moment yet? And at first, I didn't know it was like kind of out of context. We were in the middle of other discussions and whatever. And she said to me, have you had your moment yet? And it took me a couple of seconds to grasp what she was saying. But I was so happy she remembered that idea. And then I did actually. This was at second meal, and I had experienced that morning. So I told her, yes, I've had that moment. But this is all part of this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. If you hold on to a part of a whole, you hold on to the whole. And this can be applied to learning Torah. If you like right now, in a certain way, I'm learning also. If we're totally focused on the Torah that we're learning, then we're holding on to the entire Torah. We're holding on to the whole Torah. And therefore we get the energy, we get the light, we get the inspiration of the whole Torah by holding on to a part. The same thing with meditation. If through tremendous focus on a single prayer, it could be the Shema. Let's just take the Shema. So if one puts their whole heart and soul and might and mind into a verse, into a prayer, into a meditation, it's really just a prat. It's just a detail. The Shema is a detail of the whole davening. But if in that moment, if you're holding on to this part with your whole being, you're holding on to the whole. And that whole is godliness. You're holding on to God then. By doing a mitzvah or praying, the idea is to connect to God. Not to just go through the rote and routine of doing a mitzvah. The whole idea is to connect to the one who commanded us to do the mitzvah. So you do an individual mitzvah, you hold on to the whole, to the one who commanded the mitzvah. That's why it says, Ner mitzvah b'Torah or. In other words, a mitzvah is like a little candle. But that little candle is in relationship to Torah or, to the illumination of the entire Torah. So this leads to the next idea. It says in Tehillim, and it's part of the Shabbos morning Psuki de Zimra, Torah Hashem Tamima, Meshivat Nafesh. The Torah of Hashem is whole, is complete. It returns the soul. It revives the soul. That in itself is a beautiful idea, beautiful contemplation. I'll just say as an aside, the Arizal spoke, we're going to get to this later also with the Baal Shem Tov about reincarnation. So the Arizal said this is one of the verses that alludes to reincarnation, that until a person in thought, speech, and action fulfills the whole Torah, then their soul will return again and again until they can complete their connection to the whole Torah. That's what the Arizal said about this pasuk. Torah Hashem Tamima, Meshivat Nafesh. The soul has to return over and over again until it completes its connection, whether it's thought, speech, or action. And we know that the vast majority of the 613 mitzvot we don't do anymore. So obviously it has to be more on a thought or speech. That's why it says, like in the morning, for those who do what are called karbanot, who recite the different verses of the daily sacrifices, the different sacrifices. But there it says that by saying these karbanot, it's as if we brought them. It's counted to as if we brought them. Anyways, the Baal Shem Tov said, his explanation of Torah Hashem Tamima Meshivat Nafesh is that, and it's very close to, you hold on to a part, you hold on to the whole. He said that a person should know, no matter how much Torah that they know and have absorbed and integrated and learned, in relationship to the Torah itself, the Torah remains always whole. Someone might think, oh, I just finished Shas, so therefore I now possess a quarter of all Torah knowledge. I'm just making this up. But the Baal Shem Tov says it doesn't matter how much you learn. The essence of Torah will always be whole in of itself. And all you can do is be part of that wholeness. It revives the soul because of the wholeness of the Torah itself. So that's connected to a few of these other things that we've discussed, especially if you hold on to a part, you hold on to a whole. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. I am going through these relatively quickly because I do want to get through all of these if we can, so that next week, for those who came on late, we're going to be starting a new thing, Baal Shem Tov and prayer. And just we're going to keep it narrowed down. Now, a very, very interesting thing. And this I learned from Rav Ginsburg. Within Chassidus, there are many ideas of who were the Baal Shem Tov's previous incarnations. Actually, I don't think I want to get into that in depth right now, because that would take up a good part of the class. But interestingly enough, it's within Chassidic circles, it's considered that one of the parts of the soul of the Baal Shem Tov was Sadya Gaon. Sadya Gaon was one of the great leaders of Babylonian Jewry, approximately 1,000 years ago, a little bit more. He was very, very influential, extremely influential. And Rav Ginsburg, I've heard him tell this story a number of times, meaning that it obviously was a very, very important Torah to Rav Ginsburg in his understanding of the Baal Shem Tov. And the story goes like this. It's a story of Sadya Gaon. Sadya Gaon, at one point, traveled to a city. And remember, again, this is before mass communication. So everyone had heard of Sadya Gaon, but most people had never associated a face with the person. And he showed up at this town and no one knew who he was. He was there for some reason. And he was put up in a house. As it happened, people would go to the Beit Knesset and people would almost vie to be able to host people. It was considered such a great honor. So someone took Sadya Gaon home. It was over Shabbat, and treated him wonderfully. Just couldn't have done better. So next day, when Sadya Gaon was ready to leave, he thanked his host profusely and complimented him so much on his home hospitality, and he went on his way. So only a few minutes later, the neighbor of this person came over and said, "I've been meaning to ask you all day, how did it feel to have the great Sadya Gaon as your guest?" And the man said, "What?" "What?" And he runs after Sadya Gaon and he says, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I didn't do more for you." And Sadya Gaon said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you did such an incredible job of hospitality." And the man said to him, "But if I would have known that you were Sadya Gaon, I would have tried even harder." And so the teaching here is that, and actually, I believe Sadya Gaon wrote this in one of his books. And he said what he learned from this was he applied it to himself. And he said, he would say to God, "Rabbona Sha'olam, if I would have known yesterday what I know today about you and your Torah, I would have tried so much harder to come close to you and to learn more." And so Rav Ginsburg says that that those who say that Sadya Gaon became a part of the Baal Shem Tov, because apparently the Saadia Gaon wrote about this, and it influenced him tremendously. And he integrated in his life that he began to see how every day is truly a new opportunity to grow, to come close to God, to learn Torah, to do mitzvah, to help others. And of course, this became one of the pillars of the Chassidic movement. This idea of renewal, rebirth, and never resting on your laurels, always trying to do better. As it says in Chassidut, on the ladder of life, either you're going up or you're going down. And if you think staying in the same place is like somewhat neutral, it says no. If you're in the same place, it means you're going down. By definition, that's part of going down. So this was it was a major teaching to Saadia Gaon, but it also became a major teaching that the Baal Shem Tov taught over, and not just taught over, he lived it. He lived it. And I'm sure we mentioned many times is the reason the Baal Shem Tov became so influential, it wasn't just what he taught. It was how he lived what he taught. That is what impressed people that became his main students. Everyone else knew the Baal Shem Tov here and there. He did miracles. He was a wonder worker, etc. But he had a core group. This core group became the core group of the Chassidic movement. Since we mentioned reincarnation, I do want to mention a very, very important idea from the Baal Shem Tov. We've mentioned many times that the Baal Shem Tov was very well versed in the teachings of the Arizal. And in fact, he was able to integrate and absorb these teachings and then reframe them in a new language that would be more accessible to people. The teachings of the Arizal are in Kabbalistic language, and they were not taught over for the masses. But the Baal Shem Tov was able to take the principles of the teachings of the Arizal and the Zohar and turn them into a living way of life by integrating these teachings. So one of course, the most important teachings of the Arizal was about reincarnation. And it's known that people would come to the Arizal, again, people very serious about fixing everything they had to in this life. They realized that they're here to rectify, to heal, to do better. And people wanted to know who was I in a previous lifetime, in order to know what I'll call it my faults were that caused me to be reincarnated in this lifetime. And the Arizal, who had obviously a deep sense of divine inspiration, was able to tell people their whole soul histories. The Baal Shem Tov was very different. There are stories of the Baal Shem Tov revealing to people a previous lifetime when he felt that this might be the only way to explain to them what is happening in their life. So it's not like the Baal Shem Tov would never reveal to people, but in general, he held by the idea that one doesn't need to know who they were in a previous lifetime to know what they have to fix in this lifetime. And the Slonim Rebbe emphasizes this by saying that we're all here, we all have a mission, we all have a task, we all have a purpose, we all have what to fix. So the Slonim asks, well, how does a person know what they have to fix? And the Slonim Rebbe said very clearly, look, if a person looks at their life and looks at those things that are the hardest for them, then they know what they have to fix. You don't have to know from a previous lifetime what you have to fix. You can figure it out for yourself in this lifetime. And that's what Rav Ginsburg holds also. And I discussed this with him many times when I was writing the book, Return Again, The Dynamics of Reincarnation. And so I will say myself, despite doing a year's research before I even wrote the first word of the book on reincarnation, I actually have no great desire to try to find out who I was in a previous lifetime. It's it could be interesting, but it could also be terrifying. That's one of the reasons that the Baal Shem Tov didn't reveal, because it could be very traumatic to find out who you were and what you did. Not so simple. Not so simple. I know in the New Age kind of atmosphere, many people want to know their previous lifetimes. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not saying that. But one needs to be extremely careful before going down that route. Here's a short one, a really beautiful one. Is the Baal Shem Tov was known when he would travel around and go from place to place, that he would put his hand on a child's heart and bless him to be a varmer yid, a warm yid, a warm, we could call it sincere, real, passionate yid. So there was a famous Chassidic Rebbe called the Spoller Zedi. And he was a very fiery personality. He had a lot of passion in his whole being and his davening and his whole nature. And someone once asked him, Rebbe, like, how did you get this way? Like, what's your secret? How can you be on like fire all the time with enthusiasm? And so he said, I was one of the young boys that the Baal Shem Tov put his hand on my heart and blessed me to be a Varmer Yid. He said, if the Baal Shem Tov would put his hand on your heart, would you not be on fire the rest of your life? A simple story, but I love that story. I love that story. To be a warm, authentic. I see Toby put some words, and I skipped over it already. Do it again. There was some good words there. Let's see if I see the chat. Affectionate, loving, caring, yes. A varmer yid, all of those things. So I just love that story. Now I just want to mention, and there's a very, very good chance as we continue, I'm in no hurry to conclude this series, but hopefully we'll get to many of the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. But one of the stories, and I'm not going to even tell the story, but the Baal Shem Tov, of course, he loved every Jew. He would do anything for any Jew, but he also had a very strong side to him, and one thing that bothered him tremendously, excuse me, was in those days, it was fairly common for different, we'll call them preachers or magidim, to go from place to place and lecture the people, but in a very, very rebuking manner. In other words, they would come into a town, they didn't know anyone there, and they would preach fire and brimstone to the people, how they have to change their ways, how they have to do tshuva, that all the punishments for not keeping every detail of the Torah. And the simple Jew took these things very seriously. They wanted nothing more to do everything right, everything in the Torah. And so when these preachers would come and preach these terrible rebukes, it really affected everyone. And there's a number of stories that the Baal Shem Tov happened to be in a town that he was trying to help them and encourage them and give them inspiration. And then one of these preachers would come and preach fire and brimstone, and the people would be totally freaked out. And so the Baal Shem Tov made it a very, very important part of his mission, is to try to put an end to this kind of missionizing among these preachers. And so I'm just mentioning that the Baal Shem Tov, with all of his love and acceptance and caring, he also had red lines. He also had certain things that he felt were just so out of place and were so wrong that they had to be addressed. It doesn't mean that in his heart he didn't have love for the preacher of rebuke, but sometimes there's what's called tough love. And so a couple of times the Baal Shem publicly challenged these preachers and tried to get the people to understand how much God loves them and values them and appreciates them, and not to be scared by all of these proposed punishments. Okay, we have a few more minutes here. As I mentioned, I try to end a little bit early so we have enough time for discussion, because I almost always have to take Ephraim to the bus. And so I want to leave enough time for discussion. So we'll end with one other thing that is important. I'm sure everyone knows this, but again, it's important because I mentioned a lot of times we lose track of the source of different ideas, different Torahs, different ways of acting, different attitudes. And it's just like, it's just in the air. We don't know really where they come from. So we do know that Rabbi Nachman was a tremendous proponent and teacher of what we call hit bodedut, the idea of going out into nature alone and communing with God in any way that we feel is appropriate. To talk to God as if he's your best friend, be able to reveal to God everything that's on your mind, everything that's on your heart. And it can be done in 100 different ways. But the idea of hit bodedut comes from the word boded, to be alone. To be alone with God, just you and God. And ideally in nature. Ideally in nature, Rabbi Nachman talks a lot about the godliness that is enclosed in nature and how we can contact that godliness through being in nature. But it really, really needs to be recognized that Rabbi Nachman is the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. This was the Baal Shem Tov's entire life. From the time he was literally 5 years old, he was involved with hit bodedut and being in nature. That it's true that Rabbi Nachman made it a major plank of his Chassidus, and that's to his merit. But it really needs to be recognized that the Baal Shem Tov spent a good part of his life out in nature alone. Even when he was married, even when he had children, even when he became a communal leader, he continued to do what he called Avodat Hashem, by himself in nature. And there are many times he was there for days at a time. Days at a time. So that is very, very important to state. And in fact, maybe the most important story is almost how his whole path in life developed is after his father and mother died. So as an orphan, the town kind of took responsibility for him, and he went to cheder, but he continuously was missing, and he was constantly going out to the forest by himself, and that is where he met his first mentor. He was approximately 8 years old, and the Baal Shem was out in the forest communing with God, as he had done for a couple of years already. And he saw in the distance someone with talit and tefillin davening, and he just saw a tremendous light around them. And this person noticed the Baal Shem Tov, and he said to him, "Little boy, aren't you afraid to be out here in the forest by yourself?" And the Baal Shem answered him and said, "I learned from my father not to be afraid of anything but God." And when the man heard this, he understood this must be the son of Eliezer, who was part of this hidden society of tzaddikim. And this tzaddik said to the Baal Shem Tov, "Would you like to come with me and learn?" And the Baal Shem said yes. And that was it. He went off with him for a number of years, and that began his whole life story. Out in the forest by himself, not afraid of anything but God. That was the hit bodedut of the Baal Shem Tov. May we be blessed to continue to learn from the Baal Shem Tov and to make these ideas part and parcel of our entire lives.